I'm Bill Hemmer.
I'm Dana Perino.
I'm Chris Wallace, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Friday, December 10th, 2021. I'm Lisa Brady. Working has changed a lot during the pandemic, but a show that pays tribute to the American worker is coming back with the same message.
The best thing that the show can do, aside from just hopefully entertain people, is let me tap the country on the shoulder, as I like to do, and say, hey, America, what about him? What about her?
We speak with the host of Dirty Jobs, Mike Rowe.
I'm Chris Foster. 2021's been a violent year in some cities with more shootings and murders.
What we've seen here is this kind of erosion, both by the classification of crimes, as well as then also the ability for law enforcement to really kind of interdict, because in many cases their hands have been tied.
And I'm Joe Concha. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
Thanks to the pandemic, the U.S. labor force is one of the things that may never be quite the same again. A lot more people working from home, for instance, and many looking for new jobs. More than 4 million Americans quit their jobs in October, close to September's record, as job openings also hover near record territory at 11 million.
All indications are that the economy in the fourth quarter continues to grow robustly.
A positive outlook from White House economic advisor Brian Deese on Thursday that remains under debate in Washington as COVID keeps coming up with surprises. So it may be the perfect time to get our hands dirty.
Dirty Jobs is back with a brand new season.
And the incomparable Mike Rowe is back as the host.
There's no scripting, there's no writing, there's no actors. It's an honest look at work. See, I'm doing something through the lens of an honest day. Strap in, folks. This one's going to be a doozy.
Dirty Jobs previously ran from 2005 to 2013 on the Discovery Channel.
The show itself hasn't changed, but the country has, I think.
The new season premieres January 2nd on Discovery, also streaming on Discovery Plus.
We're still showing viewers a look at an honest day's work through the eyes of an apprentice. We still do virtually no pre-production. There's no actors. There's no second takes. It's still a blisteringly honest look at the day I experienced. And that recipe still works. What's different, I think, is that our country is just in this situation where words don't mean what we used to think they meant, like essential, for instance. Mm-hmm. Essential work really was the thing that appeared in the headlines that I think prompted so many people to reach out and say, Mike, you did the granddaddy of essential working shows. Why don't you bring it back and just remind people of who's keeping the lights on? I thought, well, why not? It's been 10 years. You know, I mean, I'm still sentient. I'm still upright. I can still do it. And people are still curious about the jobs that make civilized life possible for the rest of us.
We are in the midst of a labor shortage as we come out of the pandemic, or at least challenges with hiring, shall we say, that are ongoing. As someone who's been a champion of the American worker for so long, does it feel like there's been a paradigm shift to you, or does it feel like something less permanent?
Well, I don't think it's binary. I think in some places the shift has been paradigm in nature, and I think in other areas we just haven't got the memo. The real question to me is, what do 11 million open jobs really mean? Like, what does the existence of all that opportunity actually say? And it really depends who you ask. You know, my friends on the left say, look, that many open jobs simply means that employers are greedy and rapacious and not paying a fair wage. My buddies on the right say that much open opportunity simply means that human beings are fundamentally lazy and getting lazier. Now, I don't know what the absolute truth is. I think there's probably a little bit of truth in both areas, and someplace in the middle, reasonable people ought to be able to meet. But one thing's for sure, 11 million open jobs is an inconvenient truth to people who would tell us that opportunity is dead. And so Dirty Jobs has always been an opportunity for me to say, hey, America, you know, look over here. What about him? What about her? And once we get them looking and thinking and hopefully laughing, because it's a lighthearted show, you know, then I can start to say, and by the way, that welder covered in crap, he's making $130,000 a year. That woman over there standing on that factory line who looks like she lost a bet, Guess what they're paying her? You'd be surprised. And so the show can, at its best, challenge some of the stigmas and stereotypes and myths and misperceptions that keep people from exploring these careers. Bringing the show back right now makes a lot of sense because the country does feel somewhat galvanized, I think, more so than before, around this idea that, wait, something bad is happening regarding opportunities. Something's wrong when 4.2 million people quit their jobs. And so many companies are truly struggling to recruit. It's not because they're offering crap wages. It's not because the benefits are terrible. Something else is afoot, and it's not good.
Well, yeah, and maybe we're poised in these strange circumstances to have better matching between the opportunities that are out there and people who want opportunities and, as you say, maybe need to look in different places they hadn't thought of. You have kept very busy right through the pandemic, not just with your foundation, but with the myriad other ways that you've continued to shine a spotlight on the American worker, on essential workers, as you say, this word essential that people suddenly, started paying attention to. Dirty Jobs has a very loyal fan base, though. Have you been hearing from a lot of fans?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the thing is about Dirty Jobs, the most strange and rewarding and alarming thing is that it's a totally unscripted nonfiction show. And those shows don't hold up in reruns, right? Something happens in a nonfiction show, you see it once and it's done. Dirty Jobs, we went out of production in 2012, but it never went off the air. Mm-hmm. It's aired every week, sometimes every day. It still airs like 9-10 times in a row on the weekends. And so there's a hunger for something in that show, and it's not me. I mean, I'd like to think I'm not in the way of it, but there is something so basic. The truth is, Lisa, it's not really a show. It's a mission. It's a trip. And I'm not really a host. I'm a guest. And the promise from the beginning, from episode 1, was, look, I don't know what's under the rock, but I'm going to take a look. The network gave me some money. I got some jet fuel. I got a crew. And you're invited to come along. Let's see what work looks like one day at a time through the eyes of an apprentice. And that's what it's been from the start. And so viewers really responded to that, and they actually programmed the show for me. It's the viewers that are really the host of the show, because the people who we feature watch the show, and they're the experts. It's the viewers who program the show. My job really is just to stay out of the way, right? And be honest. Don't do a second take. Second takes are performances, and the audience can smell that. The feedback has been constant. The encouragement to get it back on the air was daily. And I have no idea. Well, we did 6 hours. It was just a modest bite, just kind of putting my toe back into the filthy end of the pool. And we'll see what people think, but I'm guessing they're going to dig it.
I know part of the focus for this reboot is things we rely on but don't really think about, like bridges.
Sure.
And I mention bridges in particular because that especially is something where you're only seeing the outside of a bridge, not even all the intricate details on the inside. Mm-hmm. Is that a premise that you already had in mind?
Well, it's a great metaphor. Building a bridge is something that, has to happen right now in every imaginable sense in this country. We need to build bridges between blue and white collar, left and right, both sides of the aisle. I mean, we don't really build a bridge this season on the show, but the first episode, we do feature a construction job that I didn't get to in the last round, which is rod busting. These are iron workers, and we are working on an overpass, which I guess is a bridge, right? Mm-hmm. And I spent a day with these guys, and you talk about a band of brothers, man. This is the toughest construction job I know of, because all day long, they're just hauling and twisting and tying rebar, long strands of thick iron. And they build these elaborate skeletons and these superstructures. And if you see an overpass just roughed out with rebar, it takes your breath away. It's so beautiful and so tangible and so masculine, right? This all of this iron. And then the most extraordinary thing happens. The concrete guys come in and they cover it all up. And all of this art and all of this work and all of this sweat that takes to build the guts of a bridge becomes utterly invisible to the people who use the bridge and the people who look at the bridge. And so I'm very interested in spending time with those men, because every single day they know what they do. They know how hard it is. They know how critical it is, but virtually no one else does. So the best thing that the show can do, aside from just hopefully entertain people, is let me tap the country on the shoulder and say, hey, America, what about him? What about her? What about them?
For anyone who doesn't know, you're also an amazing singer.
Well, opinions vary, but thank you.
And you even have a Christmas song. Santa Has a Dirty Job, shot right to #1 on iTunes charts after its Fox and Friends debut. Mm-hmm. How did you end up working with John Rich on that?
So funny. Yeah, he's got a show on Fox called The Pursuit. And he called me one night and said, hey, Mike Rowe, remember last time I saw you down there in Nashville? We had a pretty good time, right? And I said, yeah, we had a great time. He said, why don't you come on my show? I'd like to interview you, Mike Rowe. He can't call me Mike. I'm Mike Rowe, right? So I said, sure. So I'm sitting on his show, and we're having a pretty good time, and we're talking about sad songs. So we were swapping notes, and he said, Mike Rowe, you know what? We ought to do a Christmas album one day. And I said, yeah, we could do, a dirty take on carols or something. He goes, who's got a dirty job? Santa Claus got a dirty job. And then he goes in the bathroom during a break, and he comes out of the bathroom, and he's recorded the chorus on his iPhone. Santa Claus got a dirty job. Santa Claus got a dirty job. Santa Claus got a dirty job, and he does it all night long. Now, while he's singing this, he's doing what he would do in the bathroom, right? So I'm just listening to it, laughing, saying, dude, you wrote a song while you were using the toilet. Of course I'll record it with you. So we went to Nashville. He called the Oak Ridge Boys. We all get together and we sing the song. Last week, it was the most downloaded song in the world. And all the money that comes from it goes to my foundation and his. We split it down the middle. He's got a great charity called Folds of Honor that takes care of scholarships for families of vets, guys, women who didn't come home. And I got MicroWorks. So, each year we try and do a different kind of fundraiser. And this is one of those things I had no idea. I just minded my own business doing an interview, and the next thing you know, I'm in a recording studio, and now we got a hit. So
you just trip and fall into wonderful things. It's kind of what you do.
Sometimes the things are wonderful, and sometimes it's, feces from another species. But you know what? You take the good with the bad.
Mike Rowe, host of Dirty Jobs, which returns to the Discovery Channel January 2nd, also streaming new and original episodes on Discovery Plus. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure.
Thanks for it's nice to see you in person.
Yes, it is.
Here in the studio. What an honor.
This is Joe Concha with your Fox News commentary. Coming up.
With 3 weeks left in the year, annual murder records are already broken in at least a dozen big cities. Philadelphia's had more than 500 murders, the most there since 1990. Portland, Oregon's had the most since 1987. Austin, Texas, the most since 1984. There's also Albuquerque, Baton Rouge, Columbus, Indianapolis, Louisville, St. Paul, Tucson, Toledo, and Rochester, New York. Other cities had records broken the year before. And gun violence in general has been higher nationwide.
It is a convergence of a number of factors, in my view. Even we go before COVID.
Bill Daly is a former FBI investigator and international security consultant.
Kind of pre-COVID, we had kind of momentum by kind of liberal and state legislative groups and branches to reduce classifications of crimes. And I say this because sometimes when you reduce lower end crimes, it gives rise to higher end crimes. It's the old kind of broken window theory. If you let a broken window remain broken, people get in, they break into whatever the facility is, they commit other crimes. Much like even going back to with some of this even receding stop and frisk, where in major cities they would stop people from going using turnstiles to jump over them, and they would arrest those people, sometimes catch them with guns, and they would stop other crimes from happening. What we've seen here is this kind of erosion, both by the classification of crimes, as well as then also the ability for law enforcement to really kind of interdict, because in many cases their hands have been tied. So you look at things such as guns being perhaps more readily available on the streets, or gun crimes. We've seen some really atrocious and really impactful images of shootings caught on video of people being shot in the street. So guns are out there being used more and more. And I think also combined with what happened during COVID and some of the perhaps kind of the self-instilled constraints on police because of concerns over allegations of abuse or being in any way kind of racially discriminatory, there have been kind of perhaps a recoiling, which has resulted in this gap being filled by these criminals. And unfortunately, as I said, it starts from the lower end crimes. And we've seen those certainly over the past year that lead up into the more horrific, homicides and other murders that take place.
Do you know, are there more guns on the streets or fewer guns being taken off the streets, if you get my meaning?
I'd probably say it's probably more the latter, where there's less being taken off the streets, but those are being backfilled also by more coming into the market. So if you're not taking them off, the inventory of those guns being in the population, those let's say illegal weapons in the population are going up because people are not being stopped. They're not, there's no major interdiction going on aside from maybe some federal interdiction from ATF and some other authorities. But on a local level, they're finding their ways in and around major cities. They're finding ways into hands of minors. And I would say, it's because they're not being taken off the street. It's allowed the inventory of those weapons to propagate. And with new weapons coming into the street and onto the black market, it's allowed people who in the past may not have had access to them now have access.
You mentioned stop and frisk. There's another also kind of growing movement about bail reform. We don't necessarily want innocent people being harassed. The crime of walking while black is a term. We don't necessarily want innocent people who can't afford to get out on bail rotting in county for 6 months or whatever just because they can't afford it. It's a really tricky balance.
Yeah, and the thing about bail reform, so, I think it's important for us, with having this discussion to kind of talk about how this all comes about, because, as much as we do focus on perhaps more liberal district attorneys, state attorney generals, these in many cases are driven, the Bail Reform Act and even sentencing guidelines are driven by, again, the legislative bodies. They're the ones who make the laws. They're the ones who make the laws in our country, whether in the federal or the state level. And those are the ones also providing kind of the guidelines for bail. I was just speaking with a judge here in New York not too long ago about this. And as much as they would like to, put higher bail on certain violations, they're limited by what has been passed down by the state governments, by the legislative branch. And so I think what's happening here is we're seeing people who are out there. They know the law. They know if they steal under a certain amount of money, they're not going to be prosecuted. But again, that just, I think, kind of encourages other people to say, hey, here's a gap that needs to be filled, and they fill it with criminal acts, whether it be on the lower end, or as I said before, many of those then kind of lead up to other types of crimes where either gangs are shooting each other because of turf issues or attacking citizens themselves.
Let's talk about those smash and grab crimes. They're high profile. The surveillance video is provocative, for lack of a better word. What's happening here? Is it coordinated? Is it organized gangs? Is it one group or a small group seeing it on TV and hearing that it's successful and saying, geez, we could do that too. That's some easy money. And you've worked with businesses on theft prevention a lot. What's happening here?
Right. Kind of, we all go back just a few years ago, kind of at the rise of social media, and where people would have these flash mobs which would come out and start to dance and do other things. But then all of a sudden it took a very sad and tragic turn where these mobs would show up, to go and pilfer things and take things from stores. This is just another manifestation of it. I think if we kind of claw behind the scenes, we're going to see that these are coordinated. They're coordinated on a lower kind of grassroots level, people getting together saying, hey, if we all go up and show en masse into some, high-end retail, and we go out and we each take one handbag or two handbags, depending upon wherever the jurisdiction is and the kind of that cutoff for being prosecuted, we can do it. And so it is this kind of coordinated, wouldn't say it's coordinated from what we may have seen in the kind of older days of organized crime per se, when we had mafia and other being out there doing these things. But this is another manifestation of it. So it is coordinated. And it is something that, retailers are really faced with. They're faced with the issue of how to protect their property, their inventory, their premises, and their employees, while at the same time trying to be open for those other customers who want to come into a high-end store and shop. So they're really faced with that balance between kind of security and safety and preventing these kinds of incidents from happening.
How can you? I mean, what do you possibly do? I mean, if you're overwhelmed by, 4, 6, 8, a dozen people coming in with hammers or bats or bricks or whatever, the people working in retail aren't going to help you. Probably one security guard's not going to help you.
No. That's why these are more incidents that are impacted or occur because of the larger issues we just talked about here, where people are not being prosecuted, where there's no deterrence, where they see other people getting away with it, where there's no bail, or they're back out there. So retailers are really kind of stressed with how they protect their employees, how they protect their assets. Is that limiting the number of things that are out there in the counter and only things that are stored behind in more secure areas where it's more difficult to get, it takes more time to get to. There's some things that perhaps they could consider, but the real issue here is the fact that it's occurring, and it's occurring because people are being encouraged to do it because of not being prosecuted, of these limitations on what they'll get as far as no bail, no prosecution, maybe a desk appearance ticket. If they so decide to show up a desk appearance ticket after they're actually caught. So it does go back to these more fundamental issues we just talked about a few minutes ago.
If this is a legislative issue and a judicial issue, what about the law enforcement side? The Justice Department, for example, spending, many, many, many millions of dollars in grants and other programs to get more police officers on the streets locally. Is this a problem, the gun violence and the retail stuff, that you can effectively throw cops at?
Well, I think, yeah, the short answer is yes. And I think we have seen, that pendulum of kind of defund the police swinging back slightly. And I say that because even just the other day out in Oakland, California, which many might consider can be a bastion of kind of liberalism, but in Oakland, California, with a surge in crime and killings, they're now looking to hire more officers. So hire more police, have more police presence on the street is one thing. The other part of this is not so much the police, out there. It's the police being able to do their job. And because police, as I said before, in the past, were able to stop kind of lower end criminals, whether it's those turnstile jumpers who were caught and they were wanted for something, or they had a gun on them, without them being able to interdict on those kind of minor crimes with not being accused of being discriminatory or being abusive in any way, is that, the more police on the street provides a certain level of deterrence, but if they have no kind of clout, they have no ability to be able to kind of interdict, really it makes us feel good, but it's not going to do anything. And so that deterrence needs to be there from the get-go. But yes, more police officers, good sign that places like Oakland want to be more engaged in hiring police officers, and perhaps that pendulum of defund the police maybe going back the other way just because people say, what more can we do? We need to get more presence on the street, at least from a broader deterrence perspective, even if the hands are a bit tied from a criminal justice standpoint.
Bill Daly, former FBI investigator. After his career with the Bureau, he's had a very successful second career as a security consultant. Bill, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Have a good day.
Jason in the House, the Jason Chaffetz podcast. Dive deeper than the headlines and the party lines as I take on American life, politics, and entertainment. Subscribe now on foxnewspodcast.com or wherever you download podcasts.
Subscribe to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Joe Concha.
What's on your mind?
As you may have heard, we live in a media age where the race of the defendant and or the victim plays a major role in media coverage. We saw it in Waukesha, Wisconsin, where many outlets moved on quickly from that Christmas parade massacre that left children and grandmothers dead. seemingly because the race of the suspect didn't jibe with the desired narrative of traditional media. The Kim Potter trial, if precedent is any indicator, will be largely seen through the prism of race. Let's preview this trial. Potter is white. The man killed, Dante Wright, was black. There was a warrant out for his arrest. He did appear to resist arrest. Potter thought she was reaching for her taser. Instead, it was her gun. Fortunately, there is body cam footage complete with audio, so you can hear her genuine shock that she used her gun instead of her taser. Less ambiguity, it's always a good thing. Still, this is Minneapolis. Tensions are still high given the George Floyd case. A Black Lives Matter activist, for example, has been arrested and charged with attempting to intimidate the judge. The jury is also mostly white, which, if Potter is acquitted, will be blamed for making a wrong decision again through the prism of race. And that's unfortunate and dangerous. Maybe a police officer with no prior record of controversy made a terrible mistake. Maybe she should have known the difference between a taser and a gun, and she should be held accountable given a life was lost if a jury thinks she should. But no matter, it'll be race, 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 because our media is a one-trick pony on the matter. I'm Joe Concha.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. From the Fox News Podcasts Network, subscribe and listen to the Trey Gowdy Podcast. Former federal prosecutor and four-term U.S. Congressman from South Carolina brings you a one-of-a-kind podcast. Subscribe and listen now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.